What's going on, everyone? Dots Gaming here, and in today's video we are going to be covering Swords of Legends Online once again. So in our last video we did a brief overview of what this game is going to look like, as well as some FAQs about it. So if you did not check that video out, I would definitely go take a look. Link will be in the description below. But today's video is going to cover the 6 classes that are coming with the game, as well as the specializations and roles that those classes can fill. Also, just a quick aside, I did thankfully get into the alpha for this game, so I will be able to make more content on it as we move into the later stages of the alpha and the beta, and eventually more towards launch. I'll be able to bring you guys some looks inside the game, as well as some gameplay when we are appropriately allowed to post said content. But for today's video, we are going to just be covering the trailers that Gameforge has posted on their YouTube channel and go over, like I said, the specs and the roles. Now, the first class that we are going to cover is the Reaper. Now, the Reaper has a melee DPS spec called the Assassin and a support spec called the Occultist. Now, the Assassin spec has powerful curses and poisonous creatures that they can deploy on their enemies in combat. And on top of that, they also do have some stealth-based mechanics and are focused on attacking with lightning speed and cutting down their enemies with their scythe. For the Occultist support spec, they can sacrifice their own health or call on the mercy of their goddess to support their allies in battle. And they can also buff their allies with special breeds of insects. But the class looks really, really cool. Very, very purpley, very life and death. So I'm into it, man. I think this might be the class that I personally play. Now, the next class that we have is the Berserker. Now, the Berserker class has a unique ability to actually transform into a wolf, and that it can also function as a mount for another ally, which is pretty cool. They also have 2 specs as well. Every class does, and they have the Slayer melee DPS spec as well as the Drunken Master tank. Now, the Slayer DPS is just honestly a big, brutal melee attacker. They focus on being up and in the fray. The Slayer can also summon Phantom Warriors that will also attack in tandem with the Slayer himself. But basically, you're up in front and dealing a lot of damage. Now, on the other hand, we also have the Drunken Master that uses specially brewed medicinal wine to make their movements and attacks wild and less predictable, and giving them an edge over their allies in combat due to their own intoxication. They can use Forces of Wind to block enemy attacks, or even summon a wolf to help buff their allies. The next class that we have is the Spell Sword. Now, the Spell Sword actually can teleport around the map, which is pretty cool. They can put this cloud thing down, and they can teleport back to it after a certain period of time. I don't know if that has a distance on it, but from what I've been able to see, they do have that thing that they can teleport to, which I think is pretty cool. And they have the range DPS spec and a melee DPS spec. The range DPS spec is the Sword Artist, and basically they're able to just fire their swords from a long distance, and they also have a lot of movement spells to help to keep them out of range of their opponents, which is really cool. So they can kite a lot on this spec. Now, the melee DPS spec is called the Blade Storm, and basically it is just their melee specs. So basically they are again focused on high speed, using a multitude of blade and weapon focused attacks up close and personal on their enemies to deal their damage. They also have an attack where they can set up a pentagon of swords around them and their opponents, and if anybody walks through it, they think they'll take damage and get stunned. The class looks really cool. Looks like it's got some really cool interactions in it. The next class that we have is the Bard, and the Bard has a range DPS spec called Dissonance and a support spec called Harmony. The Dissonance spec is like an elementalist using the different, elements in Swords of Legends Online, as well as the songs they produce to deal damage and bombard their enemies with powerful attacks. On the other hand, we also have the support spec, and instead of using the elements to deal damage, we use the elements to heal our allies and channel our own soul to heal our allies. You can either protect them from harm, use damage shields, or even encase them in ice to help them to avoid dying, which is pretty neat. We also have the Summoner. Now, the Summoner is exactly what it sounds like. You're able to summon some spiritual creatures to help you in battle, whether or not you're dealing damage from a range or you are supporting your allies. Speaking of range DPS, we have Nature's Wrath as the range DPS spec, and you are now summoning these spirits to basically attack for you. And you could also have a bunch of different companions that you can summon for your different needs, and you will basically just be dealing elemental damage from a range. On the other hand, we also have the support spec, like I mentioned, and you will be channeling the spiritual energy of your class, as well as you will have your healing summons that you could bring forth instead of the damage dealing summons to help heal and buff your allies. The final class that we have is the Spearmaster. Now, what's interesting about the Spearmaster is that, you know, it might sound like on the surface that you just use a spear and attack things, but you're also actually able to summon special like constructs that can do a wide variety of different things, which I think is really interesting. Now, we also have two different specs like every other class. We have a melee DPS and a tank, with the melee DPS being called the General. Now, the General is going to basically focus on using their spear obviously more offensively. You're going to be launching enemies into the sky, attacking them with your strikes up in the air, and focusing on just, again, like I said, using that spear offensively. On the other hand, with the Phalanx, which is the tank spec, you are going to be instead using your spear to pull yourself towards your enemies and pull your enemies towards you. And then you could also even use your machines to summon like a shield wall that you can place in front of yourself and your allies in order to block and prevent some damage. Now, so far from what I've been able to see of the classes in Swords of Legends Online, they look really, really interesting, and I can't wait to actually dive into the alpha and get my hands on these classes to not only see more about how they play, but also see what the combat feels like, as that is one of the things I'm most curious about regarding this game. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What do you think about the 6 classes that we have to offer, and which one do you think you are going to play based on these first looks? Let me know in that comment section below. And guys, if you did like this video, I would appreciate if you smacked a like on it. And to keep up to date with more Swords of Legends online content, as well as other MMORPG content here on the Dots Gaming YouTube channel, I'd appreciate if you hit that sub button as well as hit the bell to keep those notifications on. But thank you all so much for stopping by today. I do very much appreciate it. As always, I'm Dots Gaming, and I'll see you all in the next video.